My brother vanished for 5 years and returned with a child. Now he's in jail for kidnapping, and my mom thinks I'm the villain. 5 years ago, my older brother, Ryan, left home with his girlfriend, Emily, without telling anyone where they were going. He was 22 at the time, and she was 21. They had been together since high school, but Emily had always been bad news. She had a way of pulling Ryan into reckless decisions, and our family could never understand what he saw in her. My parents were strict but fair. They wanted Ryan to focus on building a future, but he was always chasing excitement instead of stability. He dropped out of college in his second year, saying it wasn't for him, and started bouncing between jobs. Emily was the same way. She never held a steady job for more than a few months and always convinced Ryan that they were meant for something bigger. When they left, it wasn't a huge shock, but it still hurt. Not long after they disappeared, tragedy struck. My mom was in a terrible car accident that left her with severe injuries. I had just turned 20 and had no choice but to step up. She needed constant care, and with my father already gone years before, I became the one responsible for everything. College was no longer an option. I had to work full-time to cover medical bills and keep us afloat. For 5 years, I took care of my mother while Ryan was nowhere to be found. Not a single call, not a single message. It was like he had erased us from his life. Meanwhile, I worked my way up from a warehouse job to a management position, doing my best to keep our home and provide for my mom. She never said it outright, but I knew she missed Ryan. He had always been her favorite, and his absence weighed on her. She never talked about him, never brought up his name, but I could see it in her eyes. She never stopped waiting for him to come back. And then, one day he did. I had grown used to life without Ryan, but then, about 10 days ago, he showed up at our doorstep with a little boy, no older than 3 or 4. It had been 5 years since we last saw him. My mother and I were both home when they arrived, and when I looked through the peephole, I was completely stunned. Before I could even process what was happening, my mother flung the door open without hesitation. She didn't stop to ask for my opinion or consider whether I wanted them inside, but I understood. She was both shocked and relieved. No matter what had happened, he was still her son. She immediately pulled Ryan into a hug and looked down at the child he claimed was his son. They both looked rough. Ryan had lost so much weight he was barely recognizable. It was painfully obvious that he had been struggling for a long time. Their clothes were dirty and worn, patched up in odd places, and their hair was greasy as if they hadn't had access to a proper shower in days. But the most shocking part was Ryan himself. He had always been full of energy, but now he looked exhausted, beaten down by whatever life had thrown at him. Seeing him like that after 5 years made my stomach turn. It was clear he had been living in terrible conditions. Even though I had every reason to be skeptical about letting them in, I couldn't bring myself to blame my mother for opening the door. Once inside, my mother focused on making them comfortable, ignoring all the hurt from the past. She didn't ask him where he had been or why he never reached out. She only cared that he was finally home. After getting some food in him, Ryan finally spoke. He told us that after leaving with Emily, things had been nothing like they expected. They bounced from place to place, barely scraping by. I had been able to build a career through hard work and connections, but Ryan had no such opportunities. After months of barely surviving, he took whatever low-paying jobs he could find, never staying in one place for long. Then things took a turn for the worse. Emily wasn't the person he thought she was. The two of them fought constantly, especially after she became pregnant. After their son was born, she became distant, resentful even. Eventually, she left him for someone else, and a few weeks ago, she kicked him out with nothing but a small bag and their child. With no one else to turn to, he came back to the only place where he thought he might still be welcome. He was asking for forgiveness and a second chance. I wanted to discuss it with my mother first before making any decisions. But before I could say we needed time to think, my mother made the choice for both of us. She told Ryan not to worry anymore, that he and his son were home now, and she would take care of them. I was speechless. I was the one paying the bills, the one responsible for keeping the household running, and this decision would affect me the most. I felt like we should have talked about it first, but my mother had already spoken, and Ryan looked relieved. I didn't want to ruin the moment, so I stayed quiet. It wasn't until later, after they had gone to freshen up, that I pulled my mother aside and asked if she was serious about this. For 5 years, we had no contact with Ryan, and we had no idea what he had been through. From what he told us, he had worked different jobs over the years, so he should have been able to save some money and at least live decently. But from the way he and his son looked, it was obvious that something had gone horribly wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan had made some terrible choices along the way. Maybe it wasn't just bad luck. Maybe it was something more. He had always followed Emily's lead, and she had a way of dragging him into reckless situations. The fact that he had ended up in such a miserable state made me wonder if there had been something illegal involved. There was no way he had been holding down stable jobs and still wound up like this. I told my mother that we needed time to process everything before welcoming him back with open arms. But she wasn't having it. She told me that Ryan had come back after all this time, and that meant something. He was family, and family takes care of each other. She didn't care what he had done or where he had been. What mattered was that he had finally come home. She insisted that if he hadn't wanted to fix his life, he wouldn't have come back in the first place. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't convinced. Despite my doubts, I decided to give it a chance. I lived with him for just 2 days, feeling more and more uneasy. Then, out of nowhere, my mother sat me down while Ryan was out looking for work and his son was napping. She told me that now that Ryan was back, she wanted me to move out. I was stunned. I had no idea where this was coming from. She explained that our house only had 2 bedrooms. Ryan and his son needed one, and she had been sleeping on the couch for the past 2 nights. Her back was hurting, and she needed a proper place to sleep. Since I was financially independent, she thought it made sense for me to get my own apartment. I suggested that maybe Ryan should take the couch instead, but she refused. She said she wanted him to feel at home, to have a real chance at rebuilding his life, and forcing him onto the couch would send the wrong message. It was important that he and his son felt fully accepted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had supported my mother for 5 years, kept a roof over her head, paid the bills, made sure she had everything she needed. And now, because Ryan was back, she was just pushing me aside like I didn't matter? I wasn't jealous. I was furious. I had sacrificed so much for her, and now I was being treated like an afterthought. Instead of understanding why I was upset, she accused me of being selfish. She told me that I had her all to myself for years, and now it was Ryan's turn. I couldn't even argue. I just sat there, feeling completely betrayed. My mother insisted that I was overreacting. She just wanted me to make one small sacrifice for Ryan and his son since they had been through so much. She said it was unimaginable what they had endured, and I needed to be more understanding. That conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done for her, she expected me to just pack up and leave so Ryan could take my place? I refused, but it didn't matter. She had already made up her mind. That same day, I decided to pack my things and leave. It's been a few days now, and I've been staying with a friend since finding an apartment on such short notice is nearly impossible. But despite my anger, I've started to feel like I might need to go back home because of what happened 4 days ago. After I left, I cut off all contact with my mother. I was furious, so I muted her number and even blocked Ryan. I didn't want to hear from either of them, so I had no idea what was going on at home. Then, 4 days ago, my mother called me in tears. The moment I heard her voice, my anger faded for just a second. Something was wrong. She told me that the police had come to our house and arrested Ryan. He was now being investigated, and from the way she spoke, I could tell she was panicking. I had always suspected something shady about his sudden reappearance, but I never expected him to be arrested this quickly. But the real shock came when she told me why. The little boy Ryan had brought with him wasn't actually his. He had taken him. Ryan had been living with Emily, and when their relationship fell apart, she left him for another man. That man had a child from a previous relationship. Ryan, feeling betrayed and humiliated, decided to take the child and leave. He convinced the boy that they were going on a fun trip and made him promise not to tell anyone where they were going. The child, too young to understand what was happening, had simply gone along with it. The police had been looking for Ryan ever since. Because he had no phone and no stable address, he had been hard to track. But eventually, they found him, right in my mother's house. I was stunned. I told my mother she should have spoken to me before letting Ryan and the boy move in. Now, she was caught up in this mess, and the police were looking into her as well. Even if she hadn't known what was going on, her reputation was at stake. She begged me to help her find a lawyer to prove she had no involvement, and I agreed. But I told her one thing. She needed to cut off contact with Ryan. She needed to understand that what he had done was serious, and there was no excuse for it. But my mother refused. She insisted that, no matter what Ryan had done, he was still family. She expected me to help him, to testify in his defense, to try to keep him out of jail. That's where we disagreed. I couldn't stand by him after what he had done. Being heartbroken doesn't justify taking a child away from their home. I made my stance very clear, but my mother called me selfish. She accused me of letting my anger and resentment cloud my judgment. She even said she wished she had raised someone with more compassion. She acted like I was the villain in all of this, and now, I'm starting to question myself. I feel guilty, but I also know that what Ryan did was unforgivable. Am I wrong for refusing to help my brother stay out of jail? Update 1. 3 days have passed since my last update. I want to thank everyone who took the time to respond. That was really kind of you. After reading the comments and reflecting, I decided to do my part by putting my mother in contact with a good lawyer I know. I don't want her to suffer because of Ryan's actions. However, if she chooses to support Ryan and allow the lawyer to defend him as well, I want nothing to do with it. My responsibility is to my mother, not to Ryan. He walked away from our family years ago, and I feel no obligation to stand by him now. If my mother does, that's her choice, but I've made my stance clear. I still can't believe my mother tried to make me feel like the villain for not wanting to help my brother, a man who literally kidnapped a child. That was beyond unfair. But I can't change the situation now. I'm still staying with a friend while I search for an apartment, trying to keep myself distracted from all of this. I know my mother won't go to jail. She had nothing to do with it, and everyone knows we hadn't spoken to Ryan in years. But I still worry about her. Even though we're not on speaking terms, she's the only family I have left after my father passed. She was there for me when no one else was, so even if our relationship is strained, it still matters to me. The lawyer I connected her with is solid, with plenty of experience keeping people out of prison. I trust her. She even agreed to lower her fees for me since I'm close friends with her brother. He reassured me that everything would be fine, so I'm holding on to that hope. That being said, I've decided not to speak to my mother until she reaches out to me. Even after the lawyer agreed to represent her, she didn't call to thank me. I don't know how to feel about that. I just hope she comes around. Update 2. The trial against Ryan has started, and it's going to be difficult for my mother. I can't imagine what it's like for her to sit in court and watch her son be prosecuted. Still, she hasn't reached out to me since our last conversation, even though she's working with the lawyer I found for her. I had at least expected a thank you, but nothing of the sort has happened. I did my part as her son, and now it's no longer my concern. She has made it clear that she doesn't want me in her life. Up until a few days ago, we weren't on speaking terms, but at least she hadn't shut me out completely. Then I found out she had blocked me on Facebook. When I tried to call her to confront her about it, I realized she had blocked my number too. I could have reached out using my friend's phone, but honestly, it didn't seem worth it. If she doesn't want to talk to me or let me know what's going on in her life, I've received the message loud and clear. I told the lawyer not to update me on the trial. My job was to connect my mother with legal help, and I did that. Now, I'm moving on. I don't need to know what's going on or let it weigh me down anymore. My apartment search has been going well. I've finally secured one. The rent is a little high, but since I no longer have to support my mother, I can afford it. At first, I worried about how she would manage without my financial help, but she seemed confident when she told me to leave and cut me off. I just hope she doesn't come back looking for support because after the way she treated me, I won't provide it. In a few days, I'll finally have my own space and won't have to impose on my friend anymore. She keeps insisting I can stay as long as I need, but I want my own place to process everything that has happened. I may even take a few days off work just to sit with my thoughts and figure out where to go from here. Update 3. It's been 2 months since Ryan's trial began, and he's on his own now. My mother was quickly proven to have had no involvement in the situation. The lawyer demonstrated that she had no idea the child Ryan brought with him wasn't actually his. Once the charges against her were cleared, the lawyer passed along a message from my mother, saying she was grateful for my help. Hearing this upset me. She could have reached out to tell me herself, but even after 2 months, she chose not to. I don't understand why she's mad at me. It's been proven that Ryan was in the wrong, and I was justified in refusing to help him. I want to confront her about it, but I don't know if it's worth it. I've been struggling with this dilemma ever since the lawyer reached out. Meanwhile, my life has been going well. I have a stable job, I'm about to get promoted, and I've been living on my own for the past couple of months. It's been lonely at times, but overall, I've enjoyed the peace. I even started dating someone recently. But despite everything, I still miss my mother. Many people have told me she's toxic and that I should keep my distance, but she's still my mother. After my father passed, she was the only family I really had. We had other relatives, but she was the only one who truly understood my grief. Even though she hurt me recently, I still miss her. At the very least, I want closure. One last conversation, face to face. Update 4. Some of you encouraged me to reach out to my mother if I truly missed her. After reflecting on it, I finally decided to call her. To my surprise, she had unblocked my number and answered right away. We spoke for a little while, and I arranged to meet her the next day. When I arrived, she greeted me with a hug and immediately broke down crying. She apologized over and over, admitting that she had lost sight of what really mattered when Ryan came back. She said she had been blinded by guilt and a desperate hope that things could go back to the way they used to be. She admitted she had made a huge mistake and didn't even need me to defend myself. She now realized I had been right all along. She begged for forgiveness, saying she had no one left apart from me. She admitted that she had always had a soft spot for Ryan, and it clouded her judgment. During the trial, she realized that his actions hadn't just hurt himself, They had affected our entire family. She finally understood why I refused to help him and why blood ties alone aren't enough to justify blind loyalty. She also confessed that she had been struggling to let go of the past. Ryan had always been the child she worried about the most, and because of that, she had let herself ignore reality. But she knew now that she had been wrong to push me aside, and she wanted to make things right. I wasn't surprised by her confession. Everyone had always known she favored Ryan, but hearing her acknowledge it and say she wanted to change made me happy. I know she's being genuine because, for the past 2 months, she hasn't asked me for anything. Her brother has been financially supporting her, and she even found a remote job in his company. This isn't about money. She truly wants to fix our relationship. However, we both agreed that, for now, it's best that we continue living separately. Living on my own has given me a new perspective, and I need to focus on building my own life. But we'll stay in touch and take things one step at a time. I'm hopeful that we can repair our relationship, and I genuinely want things to work out between us.